Hey sis, have you ever found yourself in a relationship where you are constantly overthinking? Or maybe you're simply just waiting for a text back and your whole world literally revolves around them. So you're like, yep, that's me. I'm dealing with that right now. But don't worry, sis, I was dealing with that too. You don't have to stay in that anxious attachment cycle forever and ever. I'm gonna show you exactly how it went from anxious attachment to secure attachment in all of my relationships, including my marriage. Get cozy with me, sis, because this video is for you. Anxious attachment style is a type of insecure attachment that you probably developed in childhood. And then you become an adult and all of a sudden it shows up in a lot of your relationships. And as a woman, because let's be honest, ladies, we have a lot of hormones running through us and we are just naturally more emotional. So I definitely feel that this anxious attachment style definitely impacts us more than men. Now imagine if you are constantly worried about your partner and whether they love you, whether they're feeling you, or maybe you're constantly feeling like this person's gonna abandon me, and that's literally running through your mind every single moment of the day. This is literally what anxious attachment style feels like. And I think another level of this is that it can be expressed physically, right? Where you get like a pit feeling in your stomach. Some people have anxiety. I literally suffer from physical anxiety. So sometimes my heart is over racing. I'm getting a panic attack and it just feels like everything is ending around you. It's like a constant emotional radar that is on high alert, and any moment where there's a slight change in energy, like maybe it's just like, oh, he didn't text me back that way, or he said something different, it just puts your mind in the mindset that, oh, he's gonna abandon me, he doesn't love me as much. And before I got married, I definitely had anxious attachment in relationships. And one thing that I noticed, specifically this came out in my long 5-year relationship I was in, is that I just constantly had feelings of abandonment. And this was because of unresolved trauma between my mom and dad divorcing at age 9. And I honestly did not deal with that trauma until I got much older, and really until I got into my relationship with my husband. How it felt like for me was a couple of things. It was long distance, and I was living in the DC area. He was living in Philly because he was going to medical school. And I was just constantly like looking at my phone, like, okay, he hasn't texted me good morning, or okay, he hasn't sent me a message in this way. Or even sometimes when we were in the same space, right, and maybe he had to go away for a few hours to study for medical school, I was constantly like on edge of, okay, when is he gonna come back? Or he said he was gonna come back in an hour, why hasn't he come back? Like I was just constantly thinking, and I feel like I was just racing. Like I was not taking time to breathe. I wasn't taking time to assess the situation. And it wasn't my reality, because he did love me, he did care for me, and he didn't do anything to me, right? But I just had in my mind that something was going on. And I think the best way to explain, and I believe the best way to explain this like visually is like I was like this. You know, like everything is tight and clenched up. And I never, if I'm gonna be honest, I don't feel like the majority of the relationship I was calm and I was relaxed. And it wasn't until I actually dealt with trauma that happened in my childhood that I started to shift from anxious attachment to secure. If you're watching this video and you feel that you have anxious attachment, here are a few more signs that you definitely have anxious attachment style. So number one, you need a lot of reassurance in your relationship. Like you are probably the person that takes affirmations, which is a love language, to the next level, because you constantly need to be told, hey, I love you. Hey, you're beautiful. Like if you don't get this every single moment, you feel that this person loves you less. Another sign is that you're often worried about your partner leaving you. And this is what I personally was struggling with in my 5-year relationship. And a lot of times how this is expressed is you're asking your partner, hey, like we had this argument today, so what, you're gonna leave me now? Or, oh, you wanna break up with me now? And there's nothing that he said that even indicates this, but you're constantly putting out there that he's gonna leave you because you are feeling anxious. The third sign is that you are very sensitive to your partner's emotions, right? Every little mood swing, you feel like something's going on or something is wrong. And I know for me, this was definitely something that had to be worked on, especially with my husband, right? Because it's like, oh, like, you know, he's not talking as much, or like, why isn't he saying anything to me? And sometimes people just need their space. They just need to be quiet, right? But you're constantly on edge about someone else's emotions instead of worrying about your own. Another sign is you may feel like you're too much or you're too needy, and you're kind of always saying this in different phrases. Again, you're maybe be having a conversation with your partner and you're like, oh, I know I need this, and I know I'm asking you for this, and I'm probably just too much for you. And you're kind of just, again, putting some emotion out in the air that your partner did not express back to you. This one, a lot of y'all have this issue, okay? Which is you have a problem being alone or simply being single. Now, sometimes why some people are in this constant loop of being in anxious attachment in relationships is because they don't know how to be alone. They don't love their own company, right? And they feel like they constantly need to be attached to somebody. And it also comes out in a form of clinginess, right? Where you're literally clinging to someone else. So if you know you have issues being alone, you can't just spend time with yourself. Maybe you even have issues going on a solo date, right? Where you're just nourishing and having a self-love date, then you probably have anxious attachment style. And this is another one that I know some of y'all ladies be doing, is that you have this like protest behavior, right? Where you're trying to test him to see how he's gonna react, right? So for example, and I see this all over TikTok and YouTube, where people like, act cold, or, no contact for the day, and this is to someone who is clearly loves you, enjoys you, is creating constant communication with you, but you're protesting because you really want to push them to see if they're going to leave, instead of just having a flowing type of relationship. Another example of you may have anxious attachment is you overanalyze their words. And I think this is another big one for so many people. And this is the reason why I always stress to women that when you are dating someone, especially early days, you need to get on the phone. Because when you get on the phone, you can hear someone's words, you can hear someone's tones. I think because in today's society, we're doing a lot of texting back and forth, it's very easy for us women to be delulu, and we take some word and turn it into something else. Or we take someone's phrase and say it back to them out of context, right? We're not really interpreting what they actually are trying to say. And also you're reading too deeply into everything they're saying. And sometimes you're adding conclusions that they didn't even put there in the first place. It's so important, ladies, that we move from anxious attachment to secure attachment. And I'm gonna break down why this is so important. Number one, I know many of you ladies can really relate to this, is it's exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly be anxious, to constantly be on edge, right? It literally creates a physical toll on your body, and you feel drained all the time. And as women, the best thing about us is our vitality, right? Our life, our flowing. But when you stay in anxious attachment, what's gonna happen is you're not flowing. You're definitely not in your feminine. You're probably more in your masculine, because you're overanalyzing, you're thinking, and if anything, you're probably more in your wounded masculine, right? And you're just like constantly feeling drained with yourself and also with your partner, and your partner feels that energy zap as well. I think another element about why it's so important to move from anxious attachment to secure attachment is because beyond the physical feeling of exhaustion and the toll, mentally, you question your worth. You start to question how beautiful you are. You start to question your uniqueness. You start to question what brings joy to you, right? You start to question everything about you, and you start to overanalyze every little statement, and you just forget who you are, right? And ladies, if you don't understand your own self-worth, then you're never going to be able to enter into a healthy relationship, right? Even if you end up with a man who is secure in himself and in his relationship with you, you're constantly going to doubt him because you don't know your own worth. And this also translates to relationships with family, relationships with friends. Anxious attachment shows up in different manners. And I feel like, the easiest example is to bring it up in relationships, because I think for most women, it's more acute. But the truth is, you can have anxious attachment style in so many different types of relationships. So it's so important to identify it and start to do the healing. So now let's talk about how I went from anxious attachment to secure in my relationship and now marriage. Now, step one is self-awareness, right? And it's simply just, now I'm in a state where I'm very aware when I'm starting to have anxious thoughts, because sometimes it doesn't go away quickly, right? Sometimes even if you have shifted to secure in your relationships, those thoughts may bubble up for whatever reason, right? But now I'm self-aware. I know what it looks like. I know what the signs are. And again, it may be my heart is racing. I start to overthink. I start to overanalyze. But now in this stage of my self-awareness, I take time to pause, right? And I'm still. And I'm aware that it's an emotional roller coaster when, let's say, a text comes in or doesn't come in, right? And instead of me just like saying, oh, he did this or he did that, like I'm starting to run with my thoughts, I pause. And I literally allow the emotional roller coaster to go, right? Because when anxious thoughts start to come to your mind, it's like you're riding a roller coaster and you're going all the way up. You know that feeling if you've ever been on a roller coaster? But then what I do now is I allow the emotions to go whoosh all the way out. And then I'm like, okay, how do I actually really feel? And a lot of times I'm like, oh, I overthought about it. And sometimes it's as simple as maybe I was texting my husband something, and if you have WhatsApp, literally it's like the one check means it wasn't delivered, and then the two check means like it is delivered. And so back then, when it was just the one check, I'm like, oh, he turned his phone off or he doing something funny. But then if I wait just 1 minute, the second check comes in and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm overthinking. So step one is self-awareness. Step two is setting boundaries. It's so important, ladies, that when you are in a relationship, that you start to set boundaries that create emotional safety for you. And I really want to dig into this point here because setting boundaries is a layer deeper than just feeling emotionally safe with your partner and with yourself, but it's also really calming down your inner child. And if you want, I can have a whole nother video about healing your inner child, because this is also so key with moving from anxious attachment to secure attachment. So write in the comments if you feel like we should talk about inner child healing. But I know for me, it's just important that it's important that I remind little Chica that she's safe, right? And I always tell people, it's almost like little Chica sitting right next to me and I put a blanket on her and I'm like, girl, you are good. And so it's so important that you start to set boundaries and you start to have open communication. I know for me in my marriage, and this is something we're working on every day, I'll be very honest with y'all, right? We're not 100% perfect. We're not all the way relationship goals, okay? But what I've seen is that the more open me and my husband are and just really having honest conversations of how we are feeling, what's going on, what's in our mind, I know for me, I feel more and more secure within myself and within the relationship. Step number 3 is having your own reassurance techniques. And ladies, if you are loving this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, because I love creating all these videos for you, and more of these type of videos are going to be coming over the next few weeks. Now, when we talk about reassurance techniques, I'm not talking about the other person. Okay, I'm not saying you put the onus on your partner, your man, to be like, hey, I need you to reassure me. Now, of course he should, right? He should tell you you're beautiful and remind you that he's always going to be here and remind you that he's here to support you. All those things are well and good, but at the end of the day, you need to start to reassure yourself, right? And it's the biggest self-love journey, right? And what this looks like is, number 1, positive affirmations, right? I talk about this every single video, the importance of affirmations. And ladies, it's as simple as going on YouTube. I have affirmations on my podcast. I'll put the link in the description. Also, there's another lady named Tony Jones who is literally my foray into the affirmations world. And sometimes I just listen to it when I'm taking a shower, when I'm getting ready. And it's just a technique to affirm myself, to remind myself I'm beautiful, I'm loved, and I have everything that I need right inside here. I think a personal example is, for example, I would have this thought in my head, like, let's say, I don't know, maybe not even an argument happened, and I'm sitting here like, oh, they're mad at me, or they feel some type of way. And this also applies to friendships too, right? But then the second thought I have was, okay, I think for whatever reason they're mad at me, but what evidence do I have of that? And if I don't have any evidence of that, then I know it's an anxious thought that's just bubbling to my mind, and I'm reassuring myself there's nothing wrong. So again, you can do this through journaling as well. You know, some people love spending time with themselves in the morning, just really reflecting on everything that's going through their mind and just getting it all out there in paper. But definitely reassuring yourself is definitely going to move you from anxious to secure. Now, number 4 is having healthy communication and understanding how to communicate your needs, your boundaries, what makes you feel safe to your partner or to your person in a way that is feminine, potentially soft. You know, they always say you get more honey with bees, right? You know, they have the saying that you get more bees with honey, right? So you do it in a more sweet and graceful manner, and you do it in a way that's not accusing someone of anything, and you're not blaming them. Let me give you a perfect example of what this looks like, and we're gonna talk about texting because that's like the number one way people get anxious. So let's say that you are texting someone and then you don't hear from them for hours, right? So instead of saying, you never text me back, or, you know, I just feel like I don't be hearing from you. And I used to do this with my husband in the early days of dating. The best approach is to say, you know, when I don't hear from you within this time frame, I start to feel anxious when I don't hear from you. Is there a way that we can find to stay more connected? You see how calm that felt? And what I love about this, and I talk about this a lot when you're trying to do feminine communications, is you let them know how you feel. Because a lot of times when you tell a man, this is how I'm feeling, it really just makes their heart center open. And they're like, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. Like, I was just busy, or, you know, I had my phone on do not disturb and I was focused on something. But now that I know this is important to you, I'm going to lock in and make sure I do a better job in communicating. And I know for me, this was a number one issue I had with my husband, because my husband, he can be off and doing his thing and totally forget to be on his phone, right? And sometimes, like, I really needed to speak to him. And also, it was just my way of building a more secure relationship with him. So once I started to communicate my needs when it comes to healthy communication, I saw a big difference. Like, he now immediately texts me back, he calls me, he lets me know when plans are changing, I'm very clear on where he is, and I just feel like we have a much more open relationship, and it just helps me feel more secure. And number 5, which I think this is so important, is investing in yourself. So ladies, when you start to invest in your own hobbies, right, figuring out what brings you joy. Sometimes take it back to childhood. What are the things that were fun for you, right? Like maybe it was roller skating, maybe it was coloring, maybe it's dancing, but really figuring out how to make your life more fulfilling, right, and more joyful. And I feel like when you start to figure out what is the thing that makes you happy, and you have to find happiness without a man. I'm gonna say that again. You have to find happiness without a man. You can't be looking for someone else to bring you joy in your life. All they should be is an addendum. They're just adding to what you already have established. So you need to figure out what that looks like for you. The reason why it's so important, ladies, to find your own happiness is because, number 1, it builds confidence. Right? So when you enter in a relationship like I did with my husband, and I had my own life, right? I was living in Lagos, I was doing my thing, I had my people, I was traveling, I was doing so many things. And my husband noticed that. Like when he entered my life, he was like, oh, you that chick, you know? People are coming up to you, people know you, okay, like, and he saw that, and it just made him be like, okay, like she's secure in herself, she's confident in herself. And I feel like it creates a more fulfilling relationship. But the other reason why it's so important is it takes pressure off the relationship. And I think this is very important, ladies, especially when you're early on dating someone and you don't know, you just simply don't know where the relationship is going because you're still getting to know each other, right? So if you have your own life outside of your person, then they don't also feel the pressure of you, like, okay, what are we doing, or what's happening, or what's going on? You're living your life. And you're at the point where you're like, if it works, that's great. I would love that. If it doesn't work, that's fine, because there's someone else out there for me. My biggest breakthrough moment when I knew I fully have transitioned from anxious attachment to secure was a year into my marriage, right? And a lot of times me and my husband, we travel everywhere together. We've been to 17 different countries and we're always together. And I feel like I'll be very honest with y'all ladies because I like to be vulnerable here. There were times when he was apart from me and traveling and I started to feel anxious, right? And I started to be like, oh, maybe he's doing something or he's getting into something. You know, you just have those feelings, right? As women, sometimes they just bubble up. But my breakthrough moment was when I traveled away, right? So I told him, hey, I want to go to, I think I was going somewhere in Europe by myself. And I wasn't looking for him. I didn't say, hey, come with me. I was like, look, I'm doing my own thing. I'm traveling by myself. And I really enjoyed myself. Actually, it was London. Now remember, I was in London. And I just had so much fun, and I met up with a friend, and we had great food, and I went shopping, and I just did things I like to do, right? And I think another reason why I was able to have this breakthrough moment was because I started to build trust within myself and trust in how I feel. And also that trust started to extend to my husband, right? And we're still working on trust. I think trust is something that you're consistently building upon and you're creating different layers of trust. But I know for me now, specifically when my husband's having a boy night, in the early days, I was like, oh, he up to something, something's going on. And I started to work with a therapist and I realized that, wait, that feeling was coming from old and past relationship. And I'm starting to bring this into my new relationship. So I realized that when I started to recognize the signs that, okay, is this actually baggage from this relationship or from old relationships? I started to move towards more secure and trust in the relationship. And also just having trust with how I approach things now, right? So not looking through the phone, right? Because I know a lot of ladies, we be doing that. And I did that in my last relationship and I definitely was surprised. I didn't like what I found, right? And just starting to trust what my partner says and getting comfortable with him going out with his boys. Like last night, he was out until 3 a.m. And I definitely didn't think anything of it. I was doing my thing, I was working, I went to dinner by myself. Like I wasn't really like thinking about what he was doing, right? And I just really believe that we started to build real, true trust through that. I wasn't thinking about him and what he was doing. And that's when I started to realize like, okay, trust has gone up a different level in our relationship. So ladies, I think it's also important we talk about challenges you may face on this journey, because as I expressed throughout this video, moving from anxious attachment to secure, it's not linear. Right? Even in my relationship that I feel more secure, I still have moments of anxious thoughts, right? And so let's talk about how you can overcome them when they happen. When you start to have anxious thoughts, even though you move to secure, right? Where let's say 90% of the time you feel secure in yourself and in your relationship, but for whatever reason, something comes up, right? I want you to pause, okay? And I want you to reflect. And I want you to reflect on, okay, what is making me feel anxious? Is it something that triggered me, right? And a lot of times if you've been triggered by something, you can point back to what and how, right? I also want you to reflect on, okay, maybe I was triggered by something, maybe there's something in myself that's unresolved, you know, like, so for example, I've been in therapy in and out for years, right? And, you know, there's some things that have come up recently that I'm like, you know what, it might be time for me to go back to therapy to deal with this new level that I'm approaching, right? So think about that. But also pause and reflect on if there's like an immediate action. So again, let's say 90% of the time, you're secure, you're not worried about your man, you're not worried about whether he's sending you texts or not, and for whatever reason, you've not heard from him in some hours, and you were like racing, like your mind is like, what's going on, what's happening? I want you to reflect on, do you have any evidence that something bad is happening? Do you have any evidence that they want to leave you or abandon you? Do you have any evidence that they love you less? And I know you're going to answer no. I don't have no answer. I know you're going to answer no. I'm being delulu. I don't have any evidence, right? And that's going to help you move back into secure. Another step about this, especially overcoming the challenges and setbacks, is I want you to stay consistent. That is why I created this video. At any point, you can rewind this video, you can watch it again, 1 year later, 2 years later, 10 years later, right? You can always refer back to this video and you can always refer back to the steps that I talked about, right? Make sure to pause, reflect, live your life, like do all these things again and again. It's a muscle. right? It's a muscle that you have to consistently practice. But the more you start to practice, the more you're gonna start to feel more secure. Now that you got all the tools to move from anxious attachment to secure attachment, you are on the right path. But there's another piece that you need to learn in order to really make you feel secure in your relationships, and that is how to emotionally detach. So ladies, I want you to click the next video here, and it's gonna teach you the exact strategy I use to emotionally detach from someone. Trust me, ladies, it's a game changer. See you in the next video.